Legends in Music. Ikolos was walking along in a deserted valley, where the low stony hills were replaced by the thickets of thorny bushes and low trees. It would take several days to get to the village if one would take a straight road to the village, so Ikolos decided to take a shortcut, and he went along the path where only shepherds went with their sheep flocks. In his shoulder bag, he held a kubus. He walked and reflected on his last conversation with his father. His father was saddened by the fact that his son did not follow in the traditions of the clan. After all the men in the family were shamans, and it was passed from one generation to another. But it wasn't the glory of the great shamans, but in fact the fate of a musician, a kuishi, which attracted Ikolos. With all of his heart, Ikolos wished to play on the kobus as openly as other musicians played on the dumbra. Unbelievably beautiful music of the kobus should sound not only during rituals of shamans, but also on holidays and celebrations. It should please people. Now he is going to the village for a holiday, and there he will play on the kobus. After all, there is no musical instrument that can repeat the sound of a kobus. He walked along and thought about it. Suddenly it seemed to him that somebody was watching him. It was as if sharp small needles pierced into his back. He was right. Ikolos stopped and looked around. It was quiet and calm. Only the screams of the birds were heard, and the wind perched in the stalks of tall grass. He went on, but this feeling didn't leave him. Suddenly he heard a loud howl. It was wolves. Now he understood in an instant, because he took the shortcut where only the sheep graze, and wolves often followed their prey. Their hunger made them hunt during the day and night. Ikolos began running, but he didn't run for too long before he stumbled and fell. It was so stupid to run away from the pack. He stood up and feverishly thought about how he could escape to a safe place. He ran up to a tree. Would he be able to climb it? But then this idea dropped into his head. If he climbed the tree, he would definitely be trapped by the wolves. The wolves have not attacked yet, thought Ikolos. They now only observe and evaluate me as their prey, and I need to do everything to win them over. He quickly began to collect the dry twigs and sticks and stacked them on top of each other. He also collected stones and stacked them near a heap of brushwood, which would soon become a fire. The dry branches blazed, the flames flared, and a fire broke out. The golden stars began to flash one after another in the darkening sky. The valley plunged unnoticed into darkness, and only a reddish-yellow bonfire blazed with a bright spot in the night. Ikolos listened to any rustle. A mouse ran along fearfully, and a hedgehog was rustling nearby, and the deaf ears of the night birds were heard. But suddenly, very close, in the thickly growing branchy bushes, came a barely perceptible rustle, as if someone was incredibly cautious, making their way through them. Ikolos took a stone and threw it into the bushes, and waited. It was quiet. Again and again he threw stones into the bush, to where it would be easy for the wolves to hide from the keen eyes of Ikolos. He sat down by the fire and, untying his bag, he took out his kobus. The bow touched the strings and the kobus started to sing slowly. The sound of the kobus was getting louder, and he felt how he straightened his shoulders and how strength and courage were rising inside of him. The melody filled the heart of Icarus, leaving no place in it for fear or despair. In that moment, Icarus remembered an amazing story that he heard about a boy and a wolf. Images began to appear before his eyes, and the kobus began to tell a story. The people were exhausted. The cattle began to vanish everywhere. Every single night, a daring pack of wolves with cunning and intelligent leader brazenly cut sheep and did not fall into any ambushes that were set by the people. All of the men assembled and decided to arrange a roundup for the wolves. For many days they tracked the pack, and finally they surrounded them and killed all the wolves. Suddenly Bailey saw near a wolf's pit a very small wolf cub trembling, wounded, all covered in blood. His heart trembled, and without hesitation, he grabbed the puppy's scruff and put it in his bosom. In the evening, Bailey came home and unbuttoned his warm robe and picked up the wolf cub. His nephew, a 10-year-old boy, Airauyk, immediately ran to the wolf cub and exclaimed, "Uncle, uncle, who is this? What happened to him?" "Oh," said Bailey, "this is a wolf cub. I saw it and I felt sorry for it. All of the wolves were killed and this one was left alone, but he's so small and I decided to bring him home. I don't know why." "Uncle Bailey, you did the right thing. He can live with us." "Yes, but I don't think he will even survive the night," continued Bailey, sighing. "You see, he has a lot of wounds and he's so small. No, I doubt he'll survive." "I'll call him Kabi," exclaimed the boy. "It means strong and healthy. With this name, he will surely survive. You'll see." Bailey prepared the remedy and washed the wolf's wounds and fed him mare's milk. From his satiated hunger and heat, the puppy fell asleep and curled up on the felt carpet. Neighbors would often stop Bailey and discontentedly would speak to him about the rescued wolf cub. Now he was surrounded by several women and 2 men. "I don't understand you at all, Bailey," one woman angrily said. "We suffered so much from these damned wolves, and you take one of them to your house? I don't know why. I think only God created this wolf, perhaps to punish us." "Yes, yes," others began to chant, interrupting each other. "The wolf cut our cattle and attacked people. Have you forgotten the last wind of the shepherd's year in the winter, how they attacked Sabit? It's a miracle that he survived. Or have you completely forgotten about it? What about our children? Did you think about them? If you would kill one of them, perhaps?" "Don't shout," Bailey exclaimed. "It's as if you're not people, but a pack of hungry dogs. Or have you no heart at all? You know my nephew was an orphan." And the grief of the recent loss tormented his little heart. This puppy would be a joy for him. His thoughts would be occupied by him. And as soon as the wolf cub would grow, I immediately will drive it away. "No, he has to be killed," cried the men. "What are you talking about?" Bailey complained. "One wolf cannot create a pack because we've killed all of them. And besides, if he grows up in human hands, he won't be able to survive in the wild at all." The people shook their heads in displeasure and went back to their homes. The boy looked after the little wolf with great care, applying a cloth moistened with herbal infusions to the wound, and fed him. The little wolf snarled and grinned unpleasantly, but he gradually began to get used to Airauy's care, and he quickly recovered. His uncle, without noticing that, also became attached to the little puppy, although he still looked at him sideways. After all, it was a wolf in his house. The days flew by, and Kabi quickly grew stronger, and he grew up. Sensing the wolfish smell, the dogs gritted their teeth and snarled, but they were still afraid to approach Bailey's house and avoided it at all costs. Joly and the wolf Kabi became inseparable friends. The wolf cub expressed his love for the boy, and he wagged his tail like a dog, licking his friend's face at night and curling up and sleeping beside him. A year passed by unnoticeably to everyone. Kabi grew into a big, strong gray wolf with a strong, wide neck and powerful paws. Once Joly and the wolf ran away from the village into the steppe. They ran into the densely overgrown high steppe cane, but suddenly Joly felt a piercingly sharp pain in his leg. The boy stopped and grabbed his leg and fell to the grass. A dry stalk of reeds had hurt his foot. Joly pulled it out and he was bleeding from the wound. Kabi ran up to him and began to lick the wound. The blood stopped quickly. The boy stood up and tried to take a step, but he cried out in pain. And then the wolf began to poke against his arm. Joly didn't immediately realize what Kabi wanted, but when he understood it, he then embraced his neck and sat on him. So that way they reached the uncle's house. The wound was not very deep, and Bailey managed to quickly cure his nephew. Bailey looked at the sleeping wolf and said, "Kabi has become so huge. I measured him from the tip of his nose to the tip of his tail. There are 3 steps. Let him go, Joly. Everyone in the village looks sideways at our house." The boy's eyes then filled with tears. He lowered his gaze downward and didn't say anything to his uncle. Not long after that, sheep began to disappear again in the herds, and people became angry. Everyone immediately remembered the wolf living at Bailey's house, and they took stones and pitchforks and went to his house. Bailey saw the people approaching and warned his nephew. "Uncle, you know this isn't Kabi. He could never do that," exclaimed Joly. I know, my son, but there's nothing we can do," Bailey said sadly. "Take him away, otherwise he'll be killed." Joly, together with the wolf, imperceptibly ran out of the yurt and rushed into the steppe. The wind bent to the ground with the stalks of the steppe reeds, and they ruffled its tender blossoming sprinklets and gray-green leaves. Joly hugged his friend for a long time, and large tears fell on the thick wolf's hair and on the dry grass. The large, unblinking yellow eyes looked at the boy. The wolf seemed to understand everything that was happening. Joly pushed the wolf away and said, barely getting through the tears, "Well, Kabi, go! Leave!" Several years have flown by like a day, and one day in this harsh winter, Bailey went with his nephew for firewood. There was frost and they had to go far from the village in search of the dry branches. They descended from the hill to the log of the 100-year-old fir tree, broken from the wind and cracked from old age. They began to break off branches when a pack of wolves suddenly silently surrounded them. Bailey first saw them and picked up the biggest stick from the ground. Squeezing it tightly in his hands, Joly grabbed a hefty stone. They didn't have any weapons with them. The uncle and his nephew stopped dead and realized that their tormenting end was waiting for them. They could not repulse the 6 ferocious wolves, who were forced to hunt in the daytime and to attack even people. The wolves roared, preparing to attack. They began to approach them, closer and closer. Joly froze in a daze and saw a huge wolf appearing in the ridge of the hill, the leader of the pack. Their eyes met. "Kabi!" In an instant, Joly recognized him, and he couldn't take his gaze off of those familiar yellow eyes. He looked at him, but he could neither shout nor move. The leader, raising his muzzle, howled lazily. The wolves stopped and suddenly stepped back. After a moment, they disappeared, as if they weren't there at all, and only the impression of strong paws remained in the white snow. The leader of the pack again looked at Joly and, waving his fluffy tail, disappeared behind the ridge of the snow-covered hill. The night passed imperceptibly, and when Icarus removed the bow from the cobos strings, it was already morning. He felt himself free. It was quiet and calm in the valley early in the morning, when everything seemed frozen from a deep sleep. In a while, everything began to wake up slowly. Icarus again set out on his journey. A little time left to get to the village, to overcome the low hills and cross the river, and then a festive owl would appear before his gaze. The creativity of Icarus distinguished with its extraordinary unity of style. Each of his works was profound in its content, where a certain image and character manifested itself. His melodies were closely connected with the ritualistic music of shamans, so the art of Icarus was passed on among the ordinary people. Based on the tradition, Icarus created a unique kui from the kobos. His art is a bright peak in the kobos tradition.